What if everything you thought you knew about goodness was wrong? Think about the virtues we hold most dear. Charity, compassion, altruism. These are the bedrock of a decent society, the very definition of a good person. We see them in the quiet act of helping a neighbor, in the grand gesture of international aid, in the simple impulse to comfort someone who's suffering. These actions feel intrinsically right, universally noble. But what if they weren't? What if the very virtues we celebrate, like kindness and compassion, were not always strengths, but subtle forms of weakness, even hindrances to human greatness? This isn't a cynical take from a modern provocateur. It's the radical insight of one of history's most misunderstood and challenging philosophers, Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a thinker who refused to accept any value at face value. He dared to look beneath the polished surface of our most cherished morals and ask a deeply unsettling question. Who created these values, and for what purpose? Nietzsche's explosive argument was that values aren't discovered, like scientific laws floating in the cosmos waiting for us to find them. He argued they are created, invented, legislated by human beings. But if we create them, what drives this creation? And why would he, of all people, launch such a scathing, relentless attack on something as seemingly noble as pity? This question will lead us into the heart of his philosophy, into a concept he called the will to power. To understand Nietzsche's assault on our values, we first have to understand the crisis he believed humanity was facing. In the late 19th century, he made a famous and widely misinterpreted declaration: God is dead. Now, this wasn't an atheistic cheer of triumph. Nietzsche wasn't celebrating. He was making a profound cultural diagnosis. For centuries, the idea of God had served as the foundation for all of Western meaning, purpose, and morality. It was the ultimate source of truth, the guarantor of objective values. But Nietzsche observed that the Enlightenment, the rise of science, and a growing skepticism had eroded this foundation. The belief in a divine order was crumbling, whether people admitted it or not. And with the collapse of this metaphysical bedrock, humanity was left staring into a terrifying void, the abyss of nihilism. Nihilism is the horrifying realization that life might be without meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. If there's no God, no cosmic plan, then all our beliefs about good and evil, right and wrong, are left unanchored. They become baseless. For Nietzsche, this was the greatest danger and the greatest opportunity for humanity. The only way to overcome this void, he argued, was not to search for old, dead values, but to engage in a heroic act of value creation, to actively posit new life-affirming values that could give meaning to our existence on Earth. This idea is a direct challenge to how most of us think about morality. Traditional moral realism assumes that values like justice or goodness are objective facts, independent of our minds, waiting to be discovered. Nietzsche flips this entirely. He argues that creating values is the highest expression of human potential. In a world without inherent meaning, we become the meaning givers. But what guides this act of creation? If it's not divine command or objective truth, what is it? For Nietzsche, the answer is the single, fundamental driving force of all existence, the will to power. Now, this is perhaps the most dangerously misunderstood concept in all of his work. The phrase will to power, or Wille zur Macht in German, immediately conjures images of tyranny, brute force, and the domination of others. But for Nietzsche, this is a gross oversimplification. The will to power is not just about a desire for control over other people. It's the fundamental, perpetual striving inherent in all living things for growth, expansion, and, most importantly, self-overcoming. It's the drive to become more than what you are. In his later works, Nietzsche even extended this from a purely psychological principle to a cosmological one, seeing it as the engine of all life. He made a subtle but crucial distinction between Kraft, which is raw, primordial force, and Macht, which is power tied to self-mastery, discipline, and the creative channeling of one's energies. A plant reaching for the sun, an artist struggling to perfect their craft, a philosopher striving for a deeper truth. These are all expressions of the will to power. It's the drive to overcome obstacles, to organize chaos into form, to impose one's will upon oneself and the world. Therefore, for Nietzsche, all actions, including the very act of creating our moral values, are expressions of this fundamental drive. Values are the tools that different forms of life use to enhance their power and flourish. So if values are human creations driven by the will to power, and the old values are dying, what comes next? This is where Nietzsche introduces his most ambitious project, the Umwertung aller Werte, the revaluation of all values. This isn't just about tweaking our moral code. It's a philosophical revolution. The process, as Nietzsche outlines it, has two crucial steps. First, there must be a period of destruction. The philosopher of the future, as he calls this new kind of thinker, must take a hammer to the old idols. They must critically examine our existing values, especially the dominant Judeo-Christian morality, and expose their origins. They must ask, what kind of will to power created these values? Do they affirm life, or do they deny it? Do they lead to strength, or to weakness? But this destruction is not an end in itself. Nihilism, the simple rejection of all values, is a transitional stage, not the goal. The second, and more important, step is creation. After clearing the rubble of old, life-denying moralities, the value creator must then establish new values. These new values would be radically different. They would be born not from weakness or resentment, but from a position of strength and abundance. They would affirm life in its totality, including its suffering, its struggles, and its joys. This is an act of legislation, of commanding what shall be considered good, not for everyone, but for the higher types of individuals capable of such a creation. This leads us to the ideal figure who embodies this process of value creation, the Übermensch. Translated as the Overman, or more famously, the Superman, the Übermensch is another concept that has been tragically and deliberately misunderstood. This is not a biological evolution in a Darwinian sense. It's not about creating a master race to dominate others, an idea infamously distorted by the Nazi regime to justify their horrific ideology. Interpreters like Walter Kaufmann and R. J. Hollingdale have fought to correct this, emphasizing that the Übermensch is a spiritual and moral goal, a symbol of self-mastery. The Übermensch is the individual who has overcome the morality of the herd. They have organized the chaos of their own passions, disciplined their drives, and created their own table of values to give meaning to their life here on earth. They are the ultimate expression of the will to power as self-overcoming. The Übermensch doesn't look to a god or a society for their purpose. They create it themselves, saying a powerful yes to life, even in the face of its inherent meaninglessness. This is a goal for humanity to strive for, a new ideal to replace the collapsing ones. So if we are to critically reevaluate all values and strive for a self-created existence, what happens to the values we hold most dear? What happens when Nietzsche turns his gaze upon our most virtuous impulses, like kindness and compassion? This leads us to his most controversial critique, the unmasking of weak kindness. Nietzsche saves some of his most venomous prose for a virtue that seems beyond reproach, compassion. His primary target is the German concept of Mitleid, which is often translated as pity, but can also encompass compassion or suffering with. For Nietzsche, this was not a virtue to be celebrated, but a danger to be overcome. He called it a depressive and contagious instinct. Think about that. Not a noble feeling, but an infectious disease of the soul. He argued that pity, far from alleviating suffering, actually multiplies it. It preserves that which is miserable, that which is ripe for perishing, and in doing so, it hinders the overall enhancement of life. For Nietzsche, a philosophy that aims for strength and flourishing cannot have at its center an emotion that fixates on weakness and decay. He saw pity as a profound weakness that drains the vital energy and strength from both the person who pities and the person who is pitied. To understand why he held such a radical view, we have to follow him on one of his most famous philosophical investigations, laid out in his book on the genealogy of morality. Here, Nietzsche plays the role of a historical detective, tracing the origin of our moral values. He argues that pity, as a central virtue, did not arise from a place of nobility. Instead, it was born from what he called the Slave Revolt in morality. He posits two fundamental types of morality: master morality and slave morality. Master morality is the value system of the noble, the powerful, the strong. They look at themselves and their own qualities, pride, strength, courage, creativity, and they say, "This is good." Their concept of bad is simply an afterthought, referring to that which is common, weak, or cowardly. But what about the weak, the oppressed, the powerless? They cannot compete on the master's terms. So Nietzsche argues they engage in a brilliant, insidious act of psychological revenge. The Slave Revolt, initiated by what he calls the priestly class, is an inversion of the master's values. Unable to assert their will directly, the weak create a new value system born out of resentment, a deep-seated, vengeful, and impotent resentment. In this new morality, everything the master stands for is relabeled as evil. Pride becomes sin, strength becomes a threat, self-interest becomes selfishness, and conversely, everything that characterizes the weak is glorified as good. Humility, obedience, meekness, and, most importantly, pity for the suffering. These become the highest virtues. The slave morality doesn't say you are bad. It says you are evil, and we, the miserable, are the good. This, for Nietzsche, is the origin of our modern moral framework. So what is the actual harm of pity, according to this analysis? He breaks it down for both parties. For the person who pities, it's a constant drain of vital energy. It fosters a morbid preoccupation with the negative aspects of life, suffering, sickness, and failure. It leads to a pessimistic, life-denying worldview, where the goal becomes merely the elimination of pain, rather than the achievement of greatness. It makes one sick. And for the person who is pitied, being the object of pity is, in Nietzsche's view, a profound form of contempt. It doesn't empower them, it confirms their weakness. It says you are helpless, you are dependent, you are a victim. This undermines their own potential for self-overcoming, their own will to power. Pity can even be a subtle act of power on the part of the pitié, a way of feeling superior, a subtle self-defense, or even a piece of revenge. Now this is a harsh critique, and it raises a question. Is Nietzsche against all forms of compassion? Some scholars argue that he makes a distinction. They suggest he separates this debilitating Mitleid from a nobler, higher compassion. This higher form, they argue, understands suffering from a position of strength and distance, using it as a catalyst for growth rather than wallowing in it. However, other scholars contend that Nietzsche saw all forms of suffering with as fundamentally problematic. This very debate highlights just how radical and challenging his revaluation of our most basic virtues truly is. Alita. Nietzsche's philosophy of value creation is not a simple, straightforward doctrine. It's a minefield of scholarly debate, and at the center of it is a crucial question. If values are created by us, are they purely subjective? One interpretation, often called the subjectivist view, argues that yes, they are. On this reading, a value is simply an expression of an individual's pro or con attitudes, their unique perspective and will. Prominent scholar Brian Leiter, for instance, argues for an anti-realist interpretation, suggesting that Nietzsche's own evaluations are not objective claims, but powerful rhetorical tools designed to persuade us to his point of view. In this model, values aren't out there in the world at all. They are projections of our inner drives. But many other scholars resist this slide into simple relativism. They argue that while Nietzsche absolutely rejects the idea of absolute, mind-independent values, he doesn't believe all created values are equal. This is where his famous concept of perspectivism comes in. Perspectivism is the idea that all knowledge, all truth, is seen from a particular perspective. There is no view from nowhere. However, and this is the key point, this does not mean all perspectives are equally valid. For Nietzsche, some perspectives are better or healthier than others because they are more life-affirming, more conducive to the enhancement of the will to power. This suggests a kind of relational or perspectival objectivity. A value isn't judged against a universal abstract standard, but by its effect on life. Does it promote flourishing, strength, and growth? Or does it lead to decay, weakness, and stagnation? So, if there's no God to serve as a standard, what is the criterion? Nietzsche offers a fascinating one, the concept of great health, or grosse Gesundheit. This isn't just the absence of sickness. Great health is a state of profound spiritual and psychological robustness. It's a condition of being so strong that you can not only endure hardship and suffering, but actually thrive on it, incorporating it into your being and becoming stronger for it. Therefore, for Nietzsche, values can be judged by the standard. Are they healthy? Do they promote this kind of resilience and strength? This concept became increasingly central to his later work, serving as a guiding principle for his Revaluation project. This brings us back to the core controversy of compassion. Nietzsche's attack on pity is, without a doubt, the most explosive part of his philosophy for modern readers. Critics accuse him of promoting a cruel, elitist ethic that justifies indifference to the suffering of others. It seems to pave the way for a kind of social Darwinism, where the weak are left to perish without a second thought. Defenders of Nietzsche push back on this. They argue, first, that his target is a specific, sickly form of pity, the kind that revels in misery, not all forms of empathy or concern. Second, they contend that his focus is on growth. For Nietzsche, suffering is a necessary condition for all human enhancement. A morality that prioritizes the elimination of all pain at all costs is a morality that prevents the emergence of greatness. It's a psychological realism, they say, that unmasks the often self-serving motives hidden within what we call altruism. But the counter-arguments are powerful. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum is a prominent critic. She argues that Nietzsche's entire position is built on a flawed and cruel misunderstanding of human vulnerability. He seems to ignore what she calls basic vulnerability, the fact that external circumstances like poverty, disaster, or systemic injustice can fundamentally impair a person's ability to function, making his call for stoic self-overcoming seem not just unrealistic, but deeply unfair. Other critics ask what a society based on these principles would even look like. How could it maintain social cohesion without the binding agent of mutual support and compassion? There's even a poignant personal argument made against his philosophy, the story of his own mental collapse. In 1889, in Turin, Italy, Nietzsche reportedly saw a man whipping a horse in the street. He ran to the animal, threw his arms around its neck to protect it, and then collapsed, never to return to sanity. Some see this as the ultimate refutation of his own work, a final, overwhelming act of pity from a man whose philosophy could no longer contain his own deep-seated compassion. But does one act, perhaps at the onset of madness, negate a lifetime of philosophical critique? Or does it simply highlight the profound, unbearable tension within his own being? This tension is more relevant than ever. How much of our modern world, particularly the digital age, inadvertently embraces the very herd morality Nietzsche warned against? Are we, in our pursuit of collective approval and superficial kindness, sacrificing individual strength and genuine self-overcoming? Nietzsche's critique of herd morality and unexamined kindness finds a surprising and powerful resonance today. He used the term herd morality, or herden moral, to describe the value system of the masses, which prioritizes safety, comfort, and conformity above all else. It's the morality of what he called the last man, the person who seeks only contentment and avoids all risk. This, he argued, is the modern, secularized form of slave morality, which persists in democratic and socialist ideals that champion equality and pity. Think about the digital age. Social media platforms often function as massive amplifiers for the herd's voice. They reward conformity through likes and shares, and punish dissent through online mobs and cancel culture. This creates a dynamic where self-worth becomes dangerously tied to the approval of others, a key feature of herd morality. The internet can become a marketplace, as Nietzsche warned, where ideas are flattened and provocative but shallow content goes viral, while nuanced, difficult thought is ignored. His philosophy forces us to look at our own online behavior and ask, are our acts of kindness or support genuine expressions of strength, or are they unexamined gestures aimed at social approval, stemming from a desire to conform, to control, or to simply avoid confrontation? Nietzsche's central philosophical project, the one that ties everything together, is the Umwertung aller Werte, the revaluation of all values. This was meant to be the title of his magnum opus, a work he never completed. But the method itself is his most enduring legacy. It's a two-step process that defines his approach to philosophy. First, genealogy. This is the destructive phase. Like a detective, Nietzsche traces the historical and psychological origins of our most sacred values. He wants to expose their roots to show that values like pity and humility were not handed down from on high, but were created by specific groups of people out of specific and often ignoble circumstances. Weakness, fear, and vengeful resentment. By revealing their all-too-human origins, he undermines their claim to absolute authority. He saw the rise of Christianity as the first great revaluation, where slave morality triumphed over the master morality of the ancient world. His own project was a radical counter-revaluation, an attempt to undo that event and restore a noble, life-affirming ethic. The second step is creation. After the old values have been deconstructed, new, life-affirming values must be posited in their place. These new values, derived from a position of strength, are designed to enhance the will to power and promote the flourishing of what he called higher types. This radical framework, the death of God, the void of nihilism, and the call for individual value creation, made Nietzsche a major precursor to 20th century existentialism. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus were profoundly influenced by him. Sartre's famous declaration that existence precedes essence and his emphasis on radical freedom, responsibility, and the creation of values in a godless world echo Nietzschean themes. Camus, too, was deeply engaged with Nietzsche's confrontation with meaninglessness. His concept of the absurd hero who rebels against a meaningless universe by affirming life is a direct descendant of Nietzsche's call to embrace our fate and give style to our character. At the heart of this is the practical core of his philosophy, self-overcoming, or Selbstüberwindung. This is the engine of the will to power in action. It is the process of continually mastering one's limitations, disciplining one's drives, and forging one's own character like a work of art. This idea has found surprising resonance in modern psychology. Existential therapy directly incorporates these themes of finding meaning and taking responsibility for one's life. And while it's not a direct lineage, you can see parallels even in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. The focus on identifying and overcoming self-defeating thoughts to create a more empowering personal narrative is a therapeutic echo of Nietzsche's philosophical call for self-overcoming. Of course, his legacy remains deeply controversial. Most scholars agree that Nietzsche's philosophy is fundamentally incompatible with ethical universalism, the idea of a single moral code for everyone. He explicitly argues for an order of rank, believing that different moralities are appropriate for different types of people. This naturally leads to persistent charges of elitism and the devaluing of the majority. Critics also point to a potential incoherence. How can he so passionately critique morality while simultaneously denying the existence of any objective values to ground his own critique? It's impossible to discuss his legacy without acknowledging the tireless work of scholars like Walter Kaufmann, who, after World War II, played a crucial role in rehabilitating Nietzsche's reputation in the English-speaking world. Kaufmann argued powerfully that Nietzsche was a radical individualist, a fierce critic of both nationalism and anti-Semitism. He emphasized that the will to power was primarily about self-mastery and creative sublimation, not crude domination. He presented Nietzsche as a thinker of profound intellectual integrity, and yet the shadow of his misuse remains. The appropriation of his ideas by fascist movements, however distorted, stands as a potent warning of their potential danger. In the end, Nietzsche doesn't offer us easy answers or a comfortable moral system. He offers a hammer. He provides a profound personal challenge to scrutinize every value you hold, every act of goodness you perform, and to ask the hard questions. Is this truly life-affirming? Does this action stem from a position of strength and abundance, or from weakness, fear, or a need for approval? Does it lead to growth and self-mastery, or does it merely perpetuate weakness in myself and in others? His philosophy compels us to stop being passive recipients of the values of our time and to become the architects of our own. It's a terrifying and exhilarating responsibility. What are your thoughts on Nietzsche's radical ideas? Do you believe kindness can be weak? Is our modern world dominated by a herd morality? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you're ready to dive deeper into the minds that shaped our understanding of existence, subscribe and join our journey of philosophical exploration.